The topic of my presentation from NEOM is the need for a trading hub in the region. So that sounds more like a solution. So we've jumped to a solution, but there is a problem that we're looking to solve from our perspective. So let me move on to the first slide. So I'll try and go through the why, and then we'll move on to the solutions. Today we'll cover 4 key topics, really. The first one is why there's a need for a trading hub in the region from our perspective. What is it that we need to make it happen? And we'll make it a bit more relevant to NEOM, and I'll cover a brief case study, and then we'll open it up for discussion if that's okay. Do you already know about NEOM, most of you in the room? Yeah? Yeah? Otherwise you'll be living under a rock if you didn't, but just want to check. Good, excellent. And how many of you, by raise of hands, have worked in trading or understand trading, optimization of assets in the room? Okay, not as many as I thought, okay. Around 25%. Jassim, you should have been raising your hand, you know that, right? Come on. So Jassim works in EWAC as head of trading, so he didn't raise his hand, but good try, I know who you are. Let me start with, can you hear me okay so far? Excellent. So the first things first is, what are the pillars? What are the prerequisites for a trading hub? And before we go into the details, we wanted to cover the macro variables, some of the macro trends, why or how and if a trading hub is needed, especially for the future commodities, the low carbon commodities. Number one is, if you look at the UAE, if you look at the Kingdom, the KSA, if you look at other Gulf countries, there's a big push towards decarbonization of the energy sector. And there are various reasons for it. There's environmental reasons, there's economic reasons, there's social economic reasons, and which is why NEOM came into being in the first place. Because, for example, the Kingdom is looking to diversify its economy away from the traditional crude oil based economy and make it a bit more diversified economy looking into the future, 20 years, 30 years from now. So that is a big macro trend that we see, especially in the region, also obviously in Europe and the rest of the world, but especially in the region here, to move away from fossil fuels and transition towards cleaner commodities. So that's number one. And number two is with COP28 taking place in the UAE, in the region, the one before was in Egypt, obviously, so big focus on sustainability goals. As I just mentioned to a question earlier by David, the Kingdom is looking to decarbonize the power sector by 50% in the next 6 to 6.5 years. I know EWAC has made some massive progress in decarbonizing its electricity sector. Jassim, is it 70% now, roughly, in terms of renewables? 2.4 gigawatts, and that's before the new one is going to go live, right? The new solar PV will go live. So the point is, the region as a whole is making massive strides towards decarbonization of the electricity sector, and that, in effect, will decarbonize the transportation sector, the heating sector, the heavy industries, the steel industries, and so on. So this is where we start from. And obviously, as you aim towards higher goals, higher ambitions, you see ancillary technologies, you see innovation, as a byproduct which comes out of it, which is what we're seeing in NEOM as well as we speak. So, those are the key pillars that we see developing in the region, which are enabling this thinking, in terms of thought leadership towards, okay, we probably do need something around a trading hub, not just a physical hub, but a trading hub, especially from a NEOM's perspective. And last but not least, as you can see, from an economic macro perspective, attracting investment is key. Record low PPA offtake prices helps massively, and in terms of job creation, that goes all hand in hand with a wider strategy within the different countries. So whilst we're talking about energy and we're talking about decarbonization of the energy sector and how do we efficiently discover the price of these new commodities, it also sits really well within the bigger picture of the direction the different countries are taking within the region. So far, so good, Sammy? Cool. Thank you. So Sammy helped with the slides, so he's judging me as I speak, so hopefully I'm doing a good job so far. Now, let's start with a few numbers first. This is a chart from Bloomberg, and as you can see, this is looking at MENA as a whole, and one of the key trends that you see here is the dark yellow part, which gets bigger and bigger as you move towards 2050. And this one, hopefully you can read it, is the utility scale solar PVs. And obviously, hopefully this is not a surprise based on what's been discussed so far. Al Dhafra, Swayhan, 1.1 gigawatt a project just announced by SVPC, the Saudi power procurement company. These are all utility scale large solar farms. So we see the megawatts, and in other words, the volume, not just the megawatts, the megawatt hours, not just doubling, quadrupling every other year in the region. And from a trading point of view, from an optimization point of view, that is exactly what we would like to see. Because first thing first, when we talk about trading, when we talk about discovering price efficiently, you need the liquidity. You need the physical commodity there in the first place before you can churn it and trade it multiple times. So those are all signs which are going to enable and help us execute our ambition of setting up a trading hub in the region. The next graph here, this is also very interesting. This is from GE. And as you can see, so the red block there, or the purple I should say, is the actual installed capacity in the region from 2020, so about 3 years ago. And then you see a forecast going into 2030, which is why the numbers which we were showing earlier are much lower than the numbers that you probably have in mind. Because what's on the ground today and what we see being constructed in the next 5 to 7 years in the region, massive difference, massive difference. Obviously, UAE is leading at the moment with the highest number of installed capacity based on GE numbers. KSA, not too far. However, if you look into 2030, you see those numbers climb up massively. I mean, for example, KSA, according to GE, not according to NEOM, by the way, just to clarify, according to GE, KSA will have installed capacity of almost 60 gigawatts, which is roughly currently the peak demand of KSA as we speak. So that is almost, in terms of megawatts versus megawatts, that's 100% peak demand. Although when it comes to renewables, it's not the megawatts, it's the megawatt hours that matter, but that's a different topic. So the point being here is that lots of ambition, lots of political will behind it, lots of resource behind it, lots of projects behind it, and as a result, this is a conducive environment for us as traders, as optimizers, as industry experts, market participants, to start thinking of how do we make more use of this physical installed capacity that is going to become available to us. And one way to do that is being able to churn that volume multiple times for optimization reasons, especially when we start thinking of potentially exporting some of that volume into Europe potentially, which we'll talk about a bit later. So I'm going to pause here, not because I want you to ask questions, but also because I can take a rest. But any questions so far? Okay, no, thank you. Cool. So we talked about power so far. We talked about electricity sector, which primarily means wind and solar. I think in UAE, and Jassim and my colleagues from EWAC, please correct me if I'm wrong, not much wind in the UAE. Is that fair? It's more towards Oman, isn't it? It's mostly solar in the UAE, correct? There is potential. Cool, okay, thank you. But from a NEOM's perspective, because we've been looking at that in a bit more detail, there's a lot of wind in NEOM, a lot of wind in NEOM. And interestingly, the wind actually blows during the nighttime in NEOM because it's right next to the Red Sea, and it is perfectly aligned. I say perfectly, qualitatively speaking, not quantitatively. It's perfectly aligned with solar, obviously. Solar during the daytime, wind during the evening time, and you combine that with a few storage technologies, and voila, there's your solution. Because one of the biggest challenges with renewables is, unlike a conventional power system, renewables is not about how many megawatts you have necessarily on the ground. It's when do you actually generate those megawatt hours from that capacity, and that's the biggest challenge. So if you can combine solar with wind, and if the timing works, during the night period, wind, during the daytime, solar, and then if you can be clever with the interconnectors, which is why I think you talked about interconnectors, and I agree, the interconnectors coming from if we were to compare that with Europe, are underutilized in the region at the moment. But as we transition more and more towards intermittent and non-dispatchable renewables, naturally the interconnectors will pick up, not least because of policy, but because of physics. The electrons will go back and forth naturally between the different countries, especially when we talk about AC to AC interconnectors. Without getting too technical, the problem with power is it gets very technical very quickly, and physics come into play. So I'll stop there before I get too carried away with the technicals. So that's the power side, and it's great to hear that UAE's got some potential on the wind side as well. But on the fuel side, instead of burning oil and gas in the power sector, we'll decarbonize the power sector. And then because we are decarbonizing the power sector in the region, that is enabling the region, not just the KSA, but other countries, UAE, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Oman, other places, to actually start producing green hydrogen, as an example. And that's only possible if your electricity, the green electricity you're producing, is cheap enough in the first place. And to go from 25 cents down to 1 cent in the last, how many years was that, Paul?
15 years.
15 years. I mean, still massive progress, 25 times less than what it was about 10, 15 years ago, is the reason why we're talking about green hydrogen, in my view, in my humble opinion. Otherwise, you can't make the economics work at all. And the point we're trying to make here is that the combination of abundant solar and wind is allowing us to actually produce more and more hydrogen and move and start to decarbonize the fossil fuel consumption in other sectors by exporting hydrogen, maybe ammonia, primarily to Europe. There's a very good graph. Where is it? Let me jump to that one. This one here as an example. So this graph basically, this is from BP from this year. And if you look at the one on the left, the accelerated scenario is the less aggressive one compared to the net zero scenario. And effectively, what we're trying to say here is that, well, if you look at the one on the right, sorry, your left, no, your right graph. If you look at that graph, the far right, the purple part on the top, is essentially the seaborne imports for Europe. And about, I would say, we estimate around, 90% of that will be going towards Europe from the Middle East. So massive potential there in terms of not just the production of hydrogen, but also, again, thinking about how do we come up with a mechanism to efficiently discover the price of hydrogen or ammonia by utilizing a trading hub in the region. Because currently the region and also other parts of the world are used to long-term PPAs, fixed prices, and that can be an opaque process. So as we move towards more and more exports of not just hydrogen, by the way, not just the molecules, but there was a recent announcement 2 days ago by the Ministry of Energy in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that the kingdom is looking to export green electrons to different parts of the world. And it was announced in the G20 2 days ago between the Indian Prime Minister and the Crown Prince, His Royal Highness from the kingdom, of having this trade routes. They gave it a name. Was it Silk Route or Gold Route? One of them. Green Trade Corridor, thank you very much. Brain's working now. Yeah, so the Green Trade Corridor effectively includes exporting of electrons and molecules. So I know your team looked at a cable between UAE and India, and that's coming back to life again because of the fact that we've got abundant, cheap solar, wind, and suddenly we'll have surplus, and we can convert that into hydrogen, into ammonia, and actually, by the way, have subsea cables connecting us to other countries, probably towards the east and maybe more towards the northwest as well from the region. So it's all very exciting, and it's all very doable, but it is now craving for a trading hub, not just a physical hub. In NEOM, we're looking at, obviously, infrastructure. This is not confidential information, but you can join the dots. You know, we're building an infrastructure. NEOM is a massive construction site at the moment. And as part of that, of course, we will have a few hubs here and there, physical hubs to store commodities. And as a result of that, the idea is that because of the, I'm jumping between slides, so let me move on to this slide. The idea is that because of the strategic location of NEOM, because we're not far from the Suez Canal, we're not far from Europe, we're not far from the rest of the Gulf, it seems to be an ideal location from our perspective. Having said that, I would like to caveat my statement by saying that NEOM remains open to working with all the partners in the region, and it doesn't have to be, because NEOM cannot implement a trading hub by itself. A trading hub requires liquidity, that's number one, which requires working with whoever we can work with. And if it means multiple hubs, multiple delivery points, we are open to work with anyone in the region who shares our vision and who wants to contribute towards this goal. So, which I think is a good segue to kind of talk about what does the hub actually need? How do we design that hub in the first place? So on the left, you could probably see, excuse me if I'm blocking your view, on the left-hand side, we covered the characteristics of a trading hub. So first and foremost, having a diverse commodity portfolio, we believe is important, as long as we don't take the liquidity away from one commodity to the other, which there is a risk when you talk about solar and wind, but something we can tackle as long as we can standardize the product. Then you have hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, other commodities. So we are looking at a whole range of different clean commodities of the future. None of these commodities, apart from solar and wind, I would say, have a hub at the moment. Hydrogen is a good example. Hydrogen is not being traded. It reminds me of LNG. When I first started in the industry, LNG was seen as not viable, not commercially, technically possible, and hydrogen is currently going through a similar bit of a curve at the moment as we speak, and it's not traded as frequently as we would like it to, or personally I would like it to, being an ex-trader myself. So that's number one. Number two is the market infrastructure. So what do you mean? I mean, it's not just the physical, but also the softer tools that we need. So trading platform in the first place. Why? Because then we can bring everyone on the same platform. We can have a standardized approach, and to make any commodity successful in terms of being able to trade that commodity, you need to standardize it. I mean, that's basics. If you know anything about trading or optimization, standardization. That's key. And you talked about Jan, who unfortunately is flying back now because his passport wasn't valid, I think. Came up. The first thing he did was wrote contracts and standardized the trading products in Europe, and now it's a massive success. And that's exactly what we need to do in the region here as well. To encourage liquidity, one of the other key elements or ingredients is information sharing. The information is everything when it comes to trading. And I mean, I don't want to teach you to suck eggs there if you already know how trading works, but sharing information at an equal level and, without giving access to inside information to one party or the other is absolutely key because that drives the whole market. The minute you compromise that, it's not going to work and it's difficult to recover. So governance is extremely important. Ensuring the information sharing is as fair, as quick, as timely, as accurate as possible is a must for any commodity to do well from a trading point of view. The other kind of characteristics from a design point of view is the finance mechanism. I think that's pretty obvious. I won't spend too much time on it, but last but not least is the certification and the standardized standards, not the standardization standards. I won't spend too much time on it because there's a topic on certificates later, but ensuring that the low carbon fuels can be certified and tracked and their origin can be guaranteed is again an extremely value-adding proposition and a product that we need to work on as we speak. So in NEOM, we're working with European partners. We're looking at how do we start to certify green hydrogen as an example. How do we make sure that green hydrogen is compliant with RED 2 in Europe, RED 3 in Europe, and so on. So there's a whole piece of work on that front happening as we speak, not just in NEOM, but more globally in Europe. And hopefully, I know in the UAE, in EWEC, Jassim and I implemented the green clean energy certificates. Well, Jassim did. I took the credit for it a few years ago, and that's working well. So there is, the region does recognize the value of certificates and standardized standards that needs to be accepted more globally is absolutely key. So I won't spend too much time on it, but it's a very exciting topic by itself. Towards the right of the slide, you can see government support is absolutely must. Do we have anyone from the ministry here in the room today? Don't be ashamed if you are. Okay, no, cool. So I think, yeah, that will be our next step in terms of how, as we move forward. In the kingdom, we are working very closely with the Ministry of Energy. I mean, of course, we can't disclose anything. That's for the government. It's a sovereign question. It's not for NEOM to announce anything or share its views, but we are working closely with the policymakers, and it's absolutely must anywhere in the world. You know, whether that's Europe, whether that's the Middle East, or anywhere in Central Asia, whatever, the government needs to be aligned, and that obviously takes time anywhere in the world. So we need to start aligning our ducks there as quickly as we can. The infrastructure investment. There was a comment made earlier. We've got one of the best infrastructures in the world, in the region, both physically and digital infrastructure. So that is a tick in the box, especially as far as NEOM is concerned, and the collaboration with the wider ecosystem. Not just the government, but also looking at the end users, for example. So to give you an example, if there's a steel manufacturer who is looking to export steel into Europe, they need to comply with CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, as an example. And they need to buy carbon certificates, which are credible and recognized by the European Union, as an example. So there are tangible reasons why end users would be interested in paying a little bit more and trading the certificates or the relevant commodities in the region, just so that they can actually, because otherwise they'll have to pay that anyway. They'll end up paying the penalty to the European Union or the relevant body which manages the ETS, European Trading Scheme. Capacity building, obviously, like with anything, any new initiative, any new ambition, you need to have the right skills, right people, and education is a must. As it happens, we're in a university, one of the best universities in the region, and something we can potentially discuss in terms of training and knowledge sharing, because it's not something which can be implemented by one company. It needs to be a concerted effort by the government, by education players, universities, NEOMs, EWECs, think tanks, and people with a lot of wisdom who've been there, done that, is absolutely needed. NEOM is an extremely exciting project. Professionally, personally, it really gets us up in the morning knowing that we're actually working towards a much, much bigger purpose. And for us in the energy sector, when it comes to NEOM is developing a 100% renewable system from the word go. And that's, to be able to contribute towards something as big as that is just an amazing opportunity. And if you have the skills, I would encourage you to apply for jobs. We're always looking for the right talent in NEOM. So in terms of opportunities, solar all around, right next to Gulf of Aqaba, not too far, location-wise great. Because we're next to the Red Sea, very windy overnight, as I mentioned, throughout the year actually, a bit too windy sometimes, so a few dust storms here and there. And location-wise, we are, I think within a 6-hour flight, we capture around 50, or please don't quote me on this, but a large chunk of the world's population. Cheers, thank you. 40% of the world population falls within 6 hours of NEOM. And we're right next to the Suez Canal, and we're in the region which is the region of the future, as Paul mentioned. Location is quite strategic. The vision of 2030 in the kingdom, if you ever travel to kingdom, you'll see Vision 2030 everywhere. And it's quite tangible. There are, it's not just a marketing slogan. If you haven't been there, if you ever go there, you'll see it for yourself. Everything is working towards this vision, and the vision is that one of the key core deliverables of this vision is to decarbonize the economy. And there's an economic case for it. It's not just an ethical case for it, but there's an economic case for it to diversify the economy away from the oil and conventional fuels. Towards cleaner technologies and cleaner economy. Investment potential, lots of investment potential in the kingdom and in the region, obviously in the UAE as well. As NEOM would like to think that we are trying to drive things forward and we're trying to offer regional leadership. EVAC may beg to differ, but that's what we think, what we're trying to do. And on the challenges, I think one of the biggest challenges is, like with any commodity, I know when EFET introduced standard contracts, it was only 1 or 2 trades which took place years ago. And it would have been hard to believe that this would become a very liquid, standardized commodity from a trading point of view. So I think that's a big challenge. But the good thing is it's a bit of a herd mentality. Once you get the snowball going, it just gets bigger by itself then. It's the question of getting it started in the first place. So liquidity is key, but currently, obviously, it's limited, which is why we're here today, discussing the topic so we can socialize the message as much as we can and get as much support as we can so we're ready when we're ready. Because of the renewables, another challenge is to make most of the infrastructure between different borders. In other words, interconnectors, because even though all the countries in the region are looking to decarbonize and move towards solar and wind potentially, and displace liquid burning in the power sector, what we need to do more of to enable a more efficient system and reduce the cost of running the system is to make more use of the interconnectors. Why? Because if you have the interconnectors, that's another safety security option you have in place, and therefore you don't need to invest in reserves as much and so on. Without going into too much detail, it will reduce the cost of running the system. And I think last but not least is the big elephant, which is the policy and the regulation. The regulatory framework is currently, and that's also the case in Europe as well, to be fair, is not fit for a renewable system. Of course, Europe has made a lot more progress and is moving towards accommodating renewables and a new way of producing and consuming power on the flexible demand side. We need to do something very similar in the region around regulatory policy and frameworks to accommodate. And lots of examples, but I won't bore you with too much detail there. So last but not least, and then we'll wrap up. In terms of a case study which is applicable to NEOM, just to make it a bit more real in terms of what we've done, Now, NEOM, we are quite proud of the fact that we have the largest electrolyzer in the world being constructed as we speak. The financial close for it was announced, I want to say March this year, earlier this year, of $8.4 billion. So money's been set aside, committed. The capital was raised amongst 23 different banks. So that project is very much going ahead. NEOM owns 1/3 of it. Then we have our partners, Aqua Power and Air Products, who own this electrolyzer, this green hydrogen producing facility. Now, does anyone wants to venture? Any hydrogen experts here in the room?
Well, I'm from ThyssenKrupp, and we're a supplier to NEOM.
You from?
ThyssenKrupp.
ThyssenKrupp. Okay.
We're a supplier of
Okay. Thank you for disclosing that. So, do you want to? Well, do you know how big the electrolyzer is?
The total electrolysis is 2.2 gigawatts. Yeah.
And do you know the second largest in the world?
It's a few hundred megawatts.
Yeah. Exactly. Thank you. So I think the second largest in the world, we went to a conference and in Europe, it was in Europe, and they were talking about, it was 150 megawatts, less than 200 megawatts or something.
We've signed the second largest one, which is 720 megawatts.
Uh-huh.
That's in Sweden. And then our next largest out there, Shell in Rotterdam, which is 200 megawatts.
Oh, this is news for me as well. So 750 megawatts is news. Okay, well done. Congratulations. That's really good. Actually, good for the industry. So what I was going to say was, this is new, actually 750 megawatts, but this electrolyzer is 2.2 gigawatts in size, and before the 750, the second largest was around maximum, I think 200 megawatts. Yeah, so we are 10 times bigger than the second largest being constructed as we speak. Although Switzerland is also catching up a little bit, but still less than half the size of what we are building. Exactly, proper kingdom style. We like to do things big. And to actually power this 2.2 gigawatt electrolyzer to produce hydrogen, we are constructing, as we speak, 4 gigawatts of solar and wind only for this electrolyzer. So this is not connected to grid. The output from this 4 gigawatt will go straight to the electrolyzer to comply with RED 2 and RED 3 obligations to make sure we can claim it to be green hydrogen and so on. We also have an offtake agreement in place. So Air Products, one of our partners, have signed a 20-year, don't quote me on this please, but a long-term offtake agreement. So the hydrogen will be converted into ammonia, and then ammonia will be shipped around the globe and exported to different customers worldwide. So it's real, it's happening, and some of the use cases which our team looks at, Sammy and I and others in our team, is burning hydrogen in the power sector. That seems to be the holy grail, because if you have renewables which are not dispatchable, and renewables obviously take away the inertia from the power system, you still need something which you can dispatch, something which provides resistance to the system. And that's where hydrogen thermal generation kicks in. Bunkering is another one. With NEOM, we are considering it, nothing official yet, but it's a no-brainer, right next to the Suez Canal. And if you are going to produce lots of ammonia, hydrogen, that's one of the use cases. Aviation, road transportation, green steel, and we also have a zero liquid discharge policy when it comes to water. And as a result, we need to keep refining the brine that comes out as a result of the desalination process. And therefore, we need hydrogen to keep processing that into elements which we can then monetize. So is it potassium? And a few others. I'm not an engineer in terms of water. Quite a few. Yeah, exactly. So lots of use cases in terms of hydrogen, and the plan is to then export that around the world. And yeah, we've got big plans within NEOM, and that's one example of how we are actually executing our vision around transitioning towards cleaner commodities. So last thought before I wrap up. I can see the energy levels dropping a little bit, so I'll try and finish as soon as I can. Is that we've just presented a case of the physical commodity, the volumes increasing, projects coming online on the power side, on the hydrogen side, on the ammonia side, biofuels. We didn't touch on biofuels too much, but that's a key variable for us as well. And therefore, we need a commercial layer. We need a layer to further optimize this. So ideally, what we want to be able to do is, like what we see with gas as an example in Europe, the TTF, the NBP benchmarks, the trading hubs, where the commodity gets churned, traded 10, 20 times before it's delivered. You know? And that is where we see the value. So that's where we want to get to, because we can see the physical volume emerging in the next few years. So it's a no-brainer to actually start working with different stakeholders to promote liquidity, have standardized contracts with ZETA, and that's why we've joined ZETA, and we are trying to push that forward with collaboration and support from our colleagues, and especially with the experience and the wisdom that they bring in is highly appreciated. So I will wrap up on that note, but any questions, please reach out later or ask now. Thank you.